Zara's life had always been quiet, almost invisible, in the small village of Amuaka. She had learned early how to work hard, to keep her head down, and to survive in a home that had once been warm but was now shadowed by grief and neglect. Her mother had died only a few weeks earlier, leaving a hollow emptiness in the house. Her father, Mr. Kelechi Duru, had retreated into his own sorrow, or so he claimed, but instead of protecting Zara, he allowed the house to be taken over by greed and arrogance. Zara had always known her father had flaws, but she never imagined they would be the kind that sold their own child like property. The morning it happened, Zara had been kneeling in the courtyard, scrubbing the stubborn stains off the floor, when she overheard her father's voice speaking sharply in the next room. Curiosity and a rising sense of dread made her inch closer. She strained to hear, her heart thudding painfully. "Yes, I know it sounds extreme," her father said. "But I have debts I cannot pay. If I hand her over to this man, the debt is cleared, and the shop is his. I see no other way." Zara's stomach twisted. "Hand her over? To who?" a faint voice asked from behind the doorway. She froze as she realized the voice was hers. She had stepped too close, and the word she hadn't wanted to hear fully now rang in her ears. She understood instantly. Her father was selling her. Like a possession, like something to be traded and counted, not a daughter to be loved. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, the bucket in her hands forgotten. Tears ran freely down her cheeks. She wanted to scream, to beg, to plead, but a deep, hollow despair had rooted her in place. She felt abandoned, utterly alone in the world. Her father's footsteps echoed as he passed, and he did not see her crumpled form. He never would. 2 weeks after her mother's burial, the change in her life became unmistakable. Mr. Duru brought home a new woman, Mrs. Blessing Ease, and her daughter, Rita. Mrs. Blessing was striking, but her beauty was paired with laziness and cruelty. She lounged in the best seat of the house, letting servants, or in this case Zara, tend to her every need. Rita, the same age as Zara, carried an air of superiority, mocking every attempt Zara made to keep the house in order. From the moment they arrived, Zara's life became a cycle of toil and humiliation. She swept, cooked, and cleaned from dawn until late at night, only to hear scornful laughter and biting remarks from her new stepmother and stepsister. Mr. Duru hardly noticed. If he did, he said nothing, choosing instead to indulge Mrs. Blessing and ignore the daughter he had once promised to protect. Each day, the weight of betrayal settled more heavily on Zara's shoulders. Desperate, she one evening approached her father, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. "Father, please, can you ask them to ease up? I cannot. I cannot keep up with all of this alone. I am tired, and I am not their servant." Her father's response was cold, almost clinical. "You are strong, Zara. A woman must endure hardships. Obedience and patience are your only weapons now. Do not complain. Work harder, and you will survive." Zara wanted to argue, to demand protection, but his indifference struck like a hammer. It was not just neglect, this was a declaration that her suffering meant nothing. That she, the child he had promised to love and protect, was dispensable. It was around this time that Ethan Okari arrived in the village. He was a young man, his hands dark with oil, his clothes marked by years of hard work. He owned a small mechanic shed on the outskirts of the village and had come to sell it, unable to sustain his struggling business. Rumors in the market suggested he was poor, but Zara noticed something unusual in his eyes. He looked at the world with quiet observation, noticing details that others ignored. He noticed her. Zara had been working in the courtyard, her hands raw from scrubbing, when Ethan approached. He stopped at a distance, watching her with what seemed like admiration rather than judgment. There was something in the way she worked, methodical, determined, resilient, that intrigued him. He stepped forward and offered a greeting, polite and gentle, a stark contrast to the harshness Zara had grown accustomed to. Meanwhile, her stepmother, ever calculating, had already taken an interest in the mechanic shop. She whispered to Mr. Duru about its potential, imagining wealth and status, but the family's financial ruin prevented any purchase. Ethan's arrival set the wheels of a cruel transaction into motion. Within days, the deal was proposed. Ethan offered the mechanic shop in exchange for Zara's hand in marriage. To him, it was a business arrangement; to Mr. Duru and Mrs. Blessing, it was a simple transaction. They considered Zara a burden, a commodity whose value could be measured in shop tools and money owed. Zara, upon hearing the proposal, collapsed in shock, tears flowing unchecked. She begged, she cried, she tried to reason, but her father and stepmother only laughed. Even Rita joined in, her laughter sharp and cruel, mocking Zara's helplessness. "You're being ridiculous," Mr. Duru said, his tone final. "You belong to this man now. You will go with him tomorrow. There is no argument, no appeal, no discussion." Zara felt the air leave her lungs. She wanted to scream, but her voice was strangled with despair. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the world could be so cruel. The home that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a cage, and tomorrow, she would leave it forever. The following morning was bleak. Zara packed the few belongings she could carry, her hands trembling. Ethan arrived, quiet, respectful, his expression unreadable. The villagers whispered and stared as she climbed into the bus, leaving behind the house, the family, and the life she had known. The journey to Kingsbridge was long and oppressive. Crowded with strangers, the bus smelled of sweat and dust. Zara pressed herself against the window, trying to disappear, to make herself small, to survive the humiliation and fear that clung to her like a second skin. When they finally arrived, Ethan led her to his home, a dilapidated one-room apartment with a leaking roof, a cracked cement floor, and barely enough food to sustain them. It was a far cry from the luxurious home she had once imagined in her dreams, a place that now seemed hopeless. She glanced at Ethan, uncertain, fearful, and a faint spark of suspicion burned in her heart. What kind of man would buy a woman as payment and live in such poverty? Yet Ethan, sensing her fear, offered what little comfort he could. He shared his food, hiding his own hunger, and promised there would be no abuse, no cruelty. Over the following weeks, their life was humble, sometimes harsh, but laced with a small, unexpected kindness. Ethan bought small gifts, gestures of thoughtfulness that felt like warmth in a cold world. Zara began to see him not as a monster, but as a man struggling alongside her, a man who respected her in ways her own family had never done. The days in Kingsbridge were a test unlike any Zara had ever faced. Every morning, she awoke on the cold cement floor of their tiny apartment, the thin blanket barely keeping her warm. The ceiling leaked when it rained, creating puddles that she and Ethan had to navigate carefully. The air smelled of dampness and oil, a constant reminder of their humble existence. Yet, despite the harsh conditions, Zara found herself slowly adjusting, clinging to the small acts of kindness Ethan offered. He cooked what little food they had, sharing equally, even if it meant he went hungry. He spoke gently, never raising his voice, and his quiet patience became a balm to her frayed nerves. One evening, as they ate a meager meal of beans and stale bread, he reached across the small table and squeezed her hand. "We'll get through this," he said softly. "I promise." Zara wanted to believe him, though a part of her still quivered with fear. She had learned to distrust people, especially those who seemed too good to be true. Yet, there was something about Ethan's steady gaze, his sincerity, that made her want to trust. She nodded, forcing a small smile, though the uncertainty lingered in her chest. It wasn't long before the reality of survival pushed her to act. The meager savings they had were dwindling faster than she could imagine. Each day brought the threat of hunger, of eviction, of further humiliation. Zara decided she could not remain idle. She needed work, a way to help both of them survive. Ethan had warned her. "The city is not kind to a girl alone," he had said. "Danger lurks in corners you cannot imagine." But Zara's determination was stronger than her fear. She left the apartment with a few coins in her pocket, a bundle of courage in her heart, and walked the bustling streets of Kingsbridge, seeking employment. Luck, or perhaps fate, led her to Vanessa Cole, a young, wealthy woman with a sharp tongue and sharper pride. Vanessa was impressed by Zara's cooking, though she hid it behind a mask of condescension. "You may cook well enough," Vanessa said, tapping her manicured nails on the counter, "but don't expect me to respect your background. Keep your place, girl." Zara accepted the terms silently. She had learned that humility was a shield, a tool for survival. In Vanessa's luxurious home, she worked tirelessly, preparing meals, cleaning, and running errands. She endured the veiled insults and overt scorn without complaint, her mind focused on one goal: to support herself and Ethan, to make a life even in the shadow of poverty. As the weeks passed, Zara began to see the subtle threads of affection in her life with Ethan. He was not a man of words, but of actions. He repaired what little they had with care, made sure she never went hungry, and often left small surprises: an extra piece of bread, a worn but tidy scarf, a smile when she least expected it. Slowly, the walls around her heart began to soften. She began to look at him not as the man who had bought her, but as the man who fought beside her, who protected her in ways her own family never had. Their bond deepened quietly. One rainy evening, as they huddled on the cement floor under the thin blanket, sharing a single bowl of soup, Zara reached out instinctively, holding Ethan's hand. He didn't pull away. Instead, he rested his other hand on hers, and for the first time in weeks, she felt warmth that had nothing to do with food or shelter. Days turned into nights, and nights into weeks. Zara's life had shifted from despair to cautious hope. She worked for Vanessa by day and returned to Ethan by night, each of them carrying the weight of poverty together, each of them finding in the other a rare and fragile comfort. The city was harsh, the apartment small and cold, but love, however humble, had found a place in their hearts. However, challenges were never far behind. Vanessa, perceptive and cunning, began to notice the quiet ways Ethan cared for Zara. She watched him from across her grand kitchen, her pride pricked by the bond between them. Her interest quickly turned into obsession, and soon she devised a plan to insert herself into Ethan's life, to test the loyalty of the girl who dared to share it. One afternoon, Vanessa cornered Zara in the kitchen, her face a mask of polite superiority. "You've done well with the cooking," she said slowly, letting her words linger. "But surely you understand that a man like Ethan could have better. Someone refined, elegant, worthy of his attention." Zara stiffened, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She had expected insults, but this was a threat in disguise, a challenge wrapped in a compliment. She met Vanessa's gaze steadily. "I do understand," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But Ethan and we have our life. I am not interested in what you think I should want." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "You are naive," she said sharply. "Some things are not about love. Some things are about opportunity. You would do well to remember that." Zara's chest tightened, but she did not flinch. "I know what love is," she said, meeting Vanessa's gaze evenly. "And I know that money cannot buy it, and appearances cannot define it. Ethan is mine, not because of wealth, but because he and I care for each other. That is something you will never understand." The challenge from Vanessa set a new tension in Zara's life. Ethan, unaware of the full extent of Vanessa's intentions, continued to show his care, but the external pressure grew. Small events, delays in wages, missed opportunities, whispered rumors in the market, tested their resilience. There were nights when the two huddled together, worried about rent, about bills, about food, but always they found comfort in one another, their love growing in the crucible of hardship. Yet the city's difficulties were not the only tests they faced. Vanessa's obsession escalated, and she began using her influence in subtle but dangerous ways. She made calls that led to Ethan losing his small mechanic job, ensuring that their already precarious situation worsened. The apartment they had so carefully maintained grew cold and empty as bills piled up. Hunger became a regular companion, and fear crept in through the cracks of the floorboards, a constant, invisible threat. Zara's resolve, however, never wavered. She refused to give in to despair. "We will survive this," she told Ethan one night, her voice firm despite the tears that streaked her face. "Together, we will find a way. Nothing will take us apart, not her, not money, not this city." Ethan, whose pride was often masked by quiet stoicism, looked at her with a mixture of awe and deep affection. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said softly. "I am lucky to have you. Whatever happens, I will not let you suffer." The bond between them solidified. Love, which had begun as a fragile glimmer in a dim apartment, now shone brighter with every shared hardship. Each challenge, poverty, humiliation, external threats, only strengthened the invisible thread that connected them, a tether of loyalty, respect, and deep, unspoken affection. Despite their growing love, life continued to test Zara and Ethan. Vanessa's meddling had taken a toll. Calls she had made, subtle threats whispered to those who employed Ethan, resulted in him losing his mechanic job. The small income they had relied on vanished almost overnight. Rent notices piled up on the table, each one a cruel reminder that their humble sanctuary was slipping from their grasp. Hunger pressed in at the edges of every day, and the city that had seemed full of opportunity now felt like a trap. Yet Zara refused to yield. She woke before dawn, walking the crowded streets of Kingsbridge with a determination that made even Ethan pause. He had always been a man of action, but her courage inspired him anew. "I can't just watch," she told him one morning, gripping his hand. "We are partners in this life. I will find work, and I will help us survive. I cannot allow this city to defeat us." With no other options, Zara returned to Vanessa's household. She pleaded for more hours, more work, anything to help them stay afloat. Vanessa, sensing an opportunity to further humiliate Zara, agreed, on her terms. Zara would work longer hours, endure more scorn, and be constantly reminded of her humble origins. But she did it without complaint, focusing on the small victories, a few extra coins, a meal saved, a small measure of stability for herself and Ethan. Through it all, Ethan continued to care for her, his quiet presence a constant reassurance. They shared what little they had, ate sparingly, and held on to each other in the cramped apartment as the nights grew colder. On some evenings, when hunger gnawed at them, they would sit together in silence, their hands entwined, hearts beating in quiet rhythm. Love had become their shield, their weapon against the relentless pressure of the world around them. Then came the invitation that would change everything. A letter arrived one morning, embossed with gold lettering, addressed to Ethan. His eyes widened as he read it. "It's an invitation to a party," he said slowly. "Chief Leonard Oakery is hosting. They've noticed something about me, apparently." Zara's heart sank. The idea of attending such a lavish gathering was terrifying. Their clothes were worn, their apartment shabby, and she felt painfully out of place in a world of wealth and grandeur. "We can't go," she whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. "They will see us as we are, poor, dirty, a joke." Ethan shook his head gently, his eyes steady. "It's not about appearances, Zara. It's about honesty, respect, and opportunity. We will go. Together. No one will judge us more than we judge ourselves." With Ethan's encouragement, Zara agreed. They prepared as best they could, scrubbing and patching what little they had, wearing their wornest clothes but holding themselves with dignity. The streets of Kingsbridge seemed to hum with anticipation as they arrived at the grand estate, the mansion of Chief Leonard Oakery. The gates were wide, the courtyard full of luxury cars and polished shoes, and for a moment, Zara felt the old fear clawing at her chest. Vanessa was there, of course, impeccably dressed, her sharp eyes immediately finding Zara. A faint, malicious smile touched her lips as she whispered something to the crowd around her. But Zara held her head high, refusing to let fear dominate her presence. She walked beside Ethan, feeling the strength of his hand in hers, the quiet assurance of their bond giving her courage. Inside the grand hall, crystal chandeliers glimmered, casting a soft light over the elegantly dressed guests. Zara's eyes widened as she took in the richness of the surroundings, the polished floors, the flowing gowns. It was dizzying, intimidating, almost overwhelming. But Ethan's grip reminded her that she was not alone. The moment that would forever alter their lives arrived as the host called for attention. Chief Leonard Okery stepped forward, a proud man with an air of authority, and introduced his son. The crowd murmured as a tall, refined man emerged from the shadows, dressed impeccably, carrying himself with a poise that seemed almost unreal. Ethan. Or rather, the man she had known as Ethan was now revealed as Dr. Nathaniel Okery, heir to immense wealth, his presence commanding, his appearance transformed. The room seemed to still as the truth settled over Zara like a wave. She blinked, her heart hammering, disbelief and awe warring within her. "Zara," Nathaniel said, his voice calm yet rich with emotion. "I know this is a shock. I needed to see if love, loyalty, and integrity mattered more than wealth and status. You have proven yourself worthy beyond measure." Zara's knees nearly buckled. She wanted to speak, to cry, to laugh, to ask why, but all words seemed inadequate. She had loved him, not for the riches he hid, but for the man she had come to know, the one who had shared her hardships, who had respected and valued her when no one else had. Vanessa's expression changed as well. The proud, confident woman who had attempted to sway Zara now stood frozen, her carefully constructed world crumbling. And as Nathaniel stepped closer, extending a hand, Zara felt an overwhelming surge of emotions, joy, relief, disbelief, and the quiet satisfaction that her trials were not in vain. He knelt before her, in front of the grand hall, the assembled guests watching in astonishment. "Zara, will you marry me properly, not as a transaction, not as a deal, but as a true partnership of hearts?" Tears flowed freely now. She could barely find her voice. "Yes," she whispered, her hands trembling as she took his. "Yes, Nathaniel. I will." Even Vanessa could do nothing but watch, her schemes laid bare for all to see. But the moment was not about vengeance, it was about recognition, about love that had endured every hardship, every insult, every trial. Zara had been tested, humiliated, and yet she had remained steadfast, loyal, and true. As the crowd applauded, Nathaniel revealed a final truth. Vanessa was his younger sister, her attempts to manipulate and seduce him orchestrated in part to test Zara's devotion, though she had acted on her own ambition as well. Zara listened, initially stunned by the revelation, then slowly comprehension and a quiet sense of vindication filled her. Every struggle, every tear, every moment of fear had led her to this truth. She had loved the man for who he was, not for the wealth he possessed, and that love had been rewarded beyond measure. Zara's life changed overnight, yet she felt a strange mix of awe and unease. The mansion she now called home was grand beyond imagination. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, ornate furniture lined the halls, and servants moved about with quiet efficiency, attending to every need. Dresses that once belonged in magazines now hung in her closet, jewels sparkled on the shelves, and the very air seemed infused with luxury. Yet Zara remained silent, almost hesitant. She had dreamed of comfort, of wealth, of freedom from hardship, but this sudden elevation felt unreal. She had survived poverty, humiliation, and betrayal, only to be thrust into a world that was dazzling yet foreign. Her hands, accustomed to scrubbing floors and cooking with care, felt awkward when touching silks and satins. She walked through the halls slowly, taking in every detail, every sound, every shimmer of light. Nathaniel, sensing her uncertainty, approached her gently. "I know this is overwhelming," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I wanted to give you the life you deserve, but I understand if you feel hurt that I kept my identity from you." Zara's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of emotions, joy, disbelief, and a quiet hurt that had not yet faded. I love you, Nathaniel," she whispered. "But I wish you had trusted me enough to tell me the truth sooner. I survived everything thinking you were just a mechanic, a man struggling like me. And now, everything is different." Nathaniel nodded, his eyes reflecting deep understanding. "I hid it because I needed to know your heart, Zara. I had to be certain that your love was real, not for wealth or status. Every hardship, every test, was meant to see the strength of your devotion. And you have proven it, more than I could have imagined." Her lips trembled into a small, uncertain smile. Slowly, she allowed herself to believe it, to accept that love had survived poverty, cruelty, and deceit, and had emerged stronger. Nathaniel took her hand again, pressing it gently. "Welcome home, Zara," he said. "Welcome to your life." The days that followed were a mixture of wonder and adjustment. Every morning, Zara woke to a life she had only dreamed of, but she did not forget the streets of Kingsbridge, the crowded bus rides, the cold cement floors, or the hunger that had once been constant. Nathaniel remained patient, guiding her through the new world of wealth and status, but never forcing her to abandon the strength and resilience that had defined her. And then came news from Amuaka. Word had spread about Zara's transformation, and her father, Mr. Kelechi Duru, along with Mrs. Blessing Ease and Rita, arrived at the gates of the mansion. Their clothes were tattered, their faces lined with shame and desperation. They begged to see Zara, to be welcomed back into her life, claiming regret and pleading for help. Zara stood at the top of the grand staircase, her heart steady. She looked down at the once powerful figures who had treated her like a commodity, who had laughed at her pain, and felt a quiet justice settle in her chest. Nathaniel was beside her, calm and protective, as she considered them. She spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "I am grateful for life's lessons," she said. "But I cannot undo the past. I cannot welcome back those who sold me, who humiliated me, who treated me as less than human. You chose your greed over family. You chose your selfishness over love. And now, you face the consequences." The guard stepped forward politely, yet firmly, guiding her family away from the gates. They could only watch as the mansion, the symbol of Zara's triumph and endurance, remained closed to them. The humiliation they had once inflicted now mirrored back upon them, leaving them to face the streets they had scorned, hungry and rejected. Zara turned away from the gates, her gaze meeting Nathaniel's. The tension in her shoulders eased, and a sense of peace settled over her. She had endured betrayal, poverty, and manipulation, but through it all, she had remained true to herself. She had loved with integrity, she had persevered, and now she had been rewarded, not just with wealth, but with respect, love, and a life of dignity. Nathaniel pulled her close, wrapping her in a protective embrace. "You have earned every bit of this life, Zara," he said, his voice low but full of emotion. "And I promise, we will face everything together, with honesty, loyalty, and love." Zara rested her head on his shoulder, letting the warmth of his presence soothe the lingering shadows of the past. She thought of the crowded bus rides, the cold nights, the harsh words of her father and stepmother, and realized how far she had come. Every hardship had forged her strength, and every challenge had revealed the depth of her heart. In the quiet moments that followed, she understood the final lessons of her journey. She had learned that true worth was not measured by wealth or appearances, but by the heart. She had learned that love, when genuine, could survive hardship and deceit. And she had learned that those who betrayed and undervalued her would ultimately face the consequences of their own greed. Zara looked out of the grand windows, the sun casting a golden glow over the estate. She saw the streets of Kingsbridge below, the city that had once seemed so overwhelming and cruel, and she smiled. She had survived, she had loved, and she had triumphed. Her past would never be forgotten, but it no longer defined her. She was free, she was cherished, and she was finally home. The mansion buzzed with quiet activity as servants moved about, preparing for the next day, the next meal, the next moment of normalcy in a life transformed. Zara walked through the halls with Nathaniel beside her, hand in hand, their steps measured and calm. The wealth surrounding them was a symbol, yes, but it was the love they shared, the loyalty they had shown, and the strength they had nurtured that defined their future. And so, Zara, the girl who had been sold, humiliated, and tested, rose to become a woman of dignity and power. Her journey had been painful, but it had forged a resilience that wealth alone could never provide. She had found true love, she had claimed her worth, and she had proven that integrity and heart could conquer even the most insurmountable obstacles. As the sun set over the estate, casting a warm glow over the mansion and the lives within, Zara knew one final truth: wealth could be taken, hardship endured, and betrayal suffered, but a heart that loves and remains steadfast is untouchable, unbreakable, and eternally triumphant.